Hey, what's up, Plus Ultra fam? It's me, Plus Ultraman, and today we're going to continue the first of my Hero What If I've ever done. But first, as usual, a quick recap. So when we last left off, Deku had undergone 10 months of hellish training under the fanatical Stain after a chance encounter with him after Deku had saved Bakugo. Because of this, Deku is physically much stronger and also a bit more confident in his abilities, causing him to be more offensive in the UA entrance exams and pass. Stain also disappears due to the fact that Deku during their training had challenged his ideology, and Deku met All Might at the end of the story to once again be offered to inherit One for All. That story continues now. Now Deku was still shocked by All Might's proposal, even finding out that All Might's quirk was something that could be passed down. Again, this breaks all knowledge that we have of quirks, so this was very strange to him. Like in the original series, Deku still breaks down to tears, but even more so now after all the hard work he had put in with Stain. Now he's also hearing that he can be a hero from All Might, his real hero, meaning this is very emotional for him. After calming Deku down, All Might would ask Deku how he had trained himself over those 10 months because he had grown to almost a superhuman level. This makes Deku ask himself a good question: should he reveal Stain? Remember, Stain hasn't killed anyone in this timeline, at least not yet, but he has also disappeared, and Deku has challenged his ideas on heroes and made him feel even farther from All Might than the fake heroes he originally intended to kill. After being interrupted from muttering by All Might, Deku decides to tell him about Stain. While doing this, Deku also speaks about how he and Stain could have ended up a lot alike. Their ideals did sort of match in some ways, and Stain could have been Deku or Deku could have been Stain. Deku then gives a heartfelt plea to All Might to please save Stain, help him understand that this is not the right path to go down and that he should be a hero instead of just an anti-hero. And All Might is incredibly proud of this, but for now, he needs to pass on One for All as soon as possible. So, after a very strange snack from All Might, the two begin to talk and bond, since remember, they have lost those 10 months of bonding together. Deku is able to pick All Might's brain, and All Might will probably warn Deku that even though his body is developed well beyond what it would have been in the original timeline, One for All can still overwhelm him. Now, a while later, in the month of April, Deku finds himself in homeroom with the rest of Class 1A. He's still a bit surprised with the eccentric and distinctive personalities of his new classmates, but after almost a year with Stain, he quickly adapts and rolls with it. Remember, Stain's kinda crazy. Then, when Mr. Aizawa comes in and pulls the students out to test their abilities, Deku does much better. Remember, Stain trained himself to a superhuman level and put Deku through the same training. But Deku is still young, and only 10 months of training have not gotten him to the exact same level as Stain. He's almost there, but he's not exactly superhuman yet. Either way, he's going to do a lot better in the tests that require his physicality in this timeline than he did in the original timeline. Deku is also able to understand that One for All is very dangerous, but the softball throw is something where he's going to have to use it. And Deku succeeds on the first throw because remember, Aizawa does not know that Deku even has a quirk. He's probably secretly rooting for him because he's very impressed that the kid was able to get this far while quirkless, up until Deku lobs the ball farther than anyone else with a full-on throw, shocking everyone and pissing Bakugo off. Deku is just as shocked and in a lot of pain, as this is the first time he's ever used One for All, and he now realizes his biggest priority needs to be learning to harness his new power. Deku also ends up with a much better ranking in the class, maybe 10 or so, because remember, he's almost superhuman, and with his new showing of power, he seems a lot stronger than anyone in some class physically. Not to mention, he didn't have to use this to get into UA, so Aizawa sees a lot of potential with him. He decides to not kick anyone out of the class, as he had originally been trying to do in the original timeline. Aizawa was also more interested in Deku than he was in the original timeline. Not only was this kid able to get into UA without using his quirk, but the one he did have was incredibly powerful. He still gets interrogated by All Might, but after berating Aizawa's methods, I think they would come to an understanding, or at least a better one than they did in the original timeline. Now after this, the timelines almost match up again. Everything returns to normal with the class rep decisions, and the slow yet steady bonding of the class still happens. Deku also talks to All Might, making up a lot of that bonding they missed in the 10 months. And he's trying to learn about One for All and talking about Stain. Now Stain is still missing, or at least he hasn't been seen by Deku, but he's secretly been hanging around, stalking him. Stain feels a need to watch and see how far Deku gets with his ideology, seeing as how his had been shattered thanks to Deku, and Deku's is endorsed by All Might. The only thing keeping Stain away at this point is really and truly pride. He just doesn't want to admit that he's wrong, but honestly knows that he is. And again, everything is mostly as was, as the next day, All Might bursts into class and declares that today will be combat training. And after everyone gets excited and gets into their new costumes, Deku's now being red instead of green for no reason other than just to pay homage to Stain. Maybe he asked his mom for a red one instead of a green one, or in his notes that his mom read, it said red. The teams and matchups still stay the same, so Team A, which is Deku's, still has him and Uraraka, going against Team D, which is Bakugo and Ida. Now, here's a big change. Deku doesn't get nervous. He's just calm, yet anxious. He meets Bakugo's gaze the first time with a determined look of his own. He isn't without fear, but he simply is just ready. He wants to prove himself to his old friend and finally be recognized. Plus, Stain has been kicking his ass for the last 10 months, so he's much more confident in his combat skills and analysis of Bakugo's fighting style. And besides that, he has something in the back of his sleeves that Stain taught him that he just has not been able to use yet, something that won't require him to use one for all. This lack of nervousness also allows him and Uraraka to make a better plan and actually strategize before going into the fight. So, when Bakugo bursts out to attack him with a huge right hook, Deku not only catches it and slams him down, but gives a much more confident speech with a huge smile while shaking and claims that Deku is now the name of the hero. And as soon as Bakugo gets back up, Deku puts his and Uraraka's plan into motion and activates the skill that Stain had taught him, Conqueror's Haki. Now, I know it actually isn't Conqueror's Haki from One Piece that Stain uses, but it resembles it to me. The ability to dominate and immobilize your opponents through potent willpower, that's very familiar. Now, Stain does this at the end of his arc when he is able to immobilize everyone with Gran Torino and Endeavor without ingesting any blood. His willpower and bloodlust were just that powerful that he was able to stop them in their tracks with pure fear. This was something experienced by everyone, meaning it really happened, and through Toga's ability to erase her presence, we've seen that there are abilities that can be developed apart from quirks. So I think this is one that Stain has developed, and might not have too much control over himself, but in this instance was able to teach Deku. So, for sake of simplicity, and so I don't have to call it Conqueror's Haki, we'll call it Bloodlust Binding. So Deku decides to employ this new technique, but it doesn't work completely, for a few reasons. Number one, Bakugo emotionally can't feel fear towards Deku. It's impossible. They've known each other for years, and Deku has been being bullied this entire time. Number two, Bakugo has just as much willpower as Deku, meaning there's no way that he could be overpowered by Deku's will. And number three, Deku is probably focusing just on Bakugo, so he does not affect Uraraka. Not just that, this is the first time he's ever really tried to employ this technique, meaning he's brand new to it. So, Bakugo is stunned, but not immobilized. If anything, he's pissed off and begins to think that Deku also had this as a quirk and begins reaching back for another right hook. This is when he feels two hands slam into his back, and then he begins to float. Uraraka would then cheer as she makes the explosive blonde weightless. Then Deku would bind him up with tape, and they'd leave him like this. This will make Bakugo useless in combat, as any explosions from here on out would blast him away and probably make him slam painfully into the metal walls. Which is exactly what happens, as Bakugo is definitely too angry to think straight right now. This actually matches up with Deku's first plan in the original timeline, capture Bakugo, then take on Ida together. But before leaving, Deku looks sadly on Bakugo, who is almost foaming at the mouth with rage. Deku then yells out that he was really only able to beat Bakugo with Uraraka's help, and that one day they would definitely have a rematch, because Deku had to beat him to be number one. And with that, Team A leaves together to take on Ida, which isn't super hard. Deku isn't confident in using Bloodlust Binding again, but by acting as a decoy and rushing in using his almost superhuman speed to distract and kind of attack Ida, he is able to take his focus off the weapon long enough for Uraraka to pounce and take the weapon, winning the game for Team A. And after this, the rest of the matches conclude as original, but there's only three big changes here. Number one, Bakugo doesn't even try to leave. He simply confronts Deku and takes him up on that offer for a rematch, but Deku explains that he is nowhere near strong enough to give Bakugo a real challenge, and he lies that his quirk honestly just awakened about a year or so ago, and the only reason he hasn't revealed it is because it's so dangerous and the backlash hurts him so much, there's no reason for him to really be using it. He tells Bakugo that he'll fight him when he gets a better handle on it, and then he'll defeat him. Now this satisfies Bakugo's curiosity about Deku's quirk somewhat, but it also gives him a reason to train even harder before the USJ events. And this will serve to make it easier for Deku and Bakugo to become rivals, true rivals, later in the series. Secondly, there's a very big change with Kirishima. Kirishima now has a lot of respect for Deku. He gave a really manly speech and seemed to be really cool and strong in his fight with Bakugo. He does still develop that same respect for Bakugo, but I think Kirishima will be in that small inner circle of friends that Deku had in the first part of Season 1. And trust me, he still will develop that bond with Bakugo, but this won't come into play very seriously until later, so stay tuned for that. And finally, All Might. He now has real confirmation that Deku was not only a great choice, but the best choice. He also asks Deku about the strange technique he used. He's then shocked to find out that it's one of Stain's techniques, and this makes it especially serious for him to find Stain, as a technique like that makes him more dangerous than All Might originally thought. And after this, we can move on to the attack on the USJ, and here we get another big change. Stain appears once he realizes that Deku is in real danger and jumps into action, wreaking absolute havoc on the untrained villain. He shows up in the main courtyard area that Aizawa is fighting in, and slashes his opponents enough to draw a small amount of blood and immobilize them before knocking them out in a quick burst of speed. This is the most non-lethal yet effective way that he can fight. But over on Deku's end of the USJ, he, Sue, and Mineta are trying to come up with a plan to get off of the sinking ship. And this happens a lot quicker, as remember, Deku has received a major confidence boost. He still is kind of scared, but he takes charge of the situation and decides to use his bloodless binding technique to make it a lot easier once Sue jumps and catches him after making the whirlpool into the water. Then Mineta does his part and they get out, saving a lot of time. This extra time allows Deku and his group to head over to the next nearest group, which would be Tokoyami and Koda, and head over then with a bigger group to the main area where Aizawa and Stain were fighting. Deku would be shocked to see Stain at first, but he would then realize that they were still fighting the small fry villains as well as Shigaraki and the Numu. Seeing this, Deku instantly jumps in to fight with his teachers, and I think seeing his classmate jump in to fight would cause Tokoyami to fight as well. This means it's super easy to take down the small fry villains that might have came, as well as trying to at least hold off the Nomu somewhat. This would also keep Shigaraki pretty tied up, making it impossible for him to go over and try and attack Asui. Seeing that none of their attacks really have any effect on the Nomu though, Deku resolves himself and fires a full power smash right into his midsection, though it does nothing. But it also has no recoil and he's completely fine afterwards. Subconsciously, he locks this in for later. Before Nomu could retaliate though, All Might shows up and saves Deku, getting him out of harm's way, and tells him and the rest of them to get back. After this, the timeline mostly goes back as it was. The only real difference is, Stain is there to witness all of this. The students of Class 1A even still show up to try and help All Might, and All Might still finishes off Nomu the way he did in the original timeline. The last major difference comes when Stain is questioned as to who he is, but All Might steps in and claims him as one of the sidekicks from his agency. For now, this satisfies the curiosity of those around. This also makes Stain almost fanboy out, as he has just seen All Might in action for himself. But he holds it together and congratulates Deku on his growth and acceptance to UA. Now later, in the hospital, after talking to the police, Deku, Stain, and All Might have a long talk, and it's decided that Stain would apply for a hero license with All Might's personal recommendation, which should allow him to skip the hero training, especially since he'll be inducted into All Might's agency. This is a dream come true for Stain, to purge evil next to All Might, but at the same time, he also wants to stay for Deku's development, and with that, All Might finds him worthy to learn Deku's secret, which blows Stain's mind. This also answers the question for Stain of how Deku had a quirk, but it also brings up another one which he had to ask Deku. Why are you using one for all in one place at a time? I mean, All Might is always powered up, so why are you turning it off? And Deku facepalms at the obvious answer to his dilemma. But that plus Ultra Fam is where we'll be leaving this one off for now. So, very quickly, there are a few things to discuss here. Number one, the whole bloodless binding thing. Yes, this is an original creation, but it makes sense to me. A lot of the things are still being revealed in MHA, and we're seeing that quirks aren't necessarily the only path to power. And I think with Toga's little thing about being able to erase our presence, we should infer that there are other types of techniques like that out in the world. Number two, Bakugo and Deku. So what's going to happen from here? Well, Deku has a lot more confidence and is able to meet Bakugo as a challenge earlier than he was in the original timeline. So I think the two are going to grow to respect each other much quicker than they did in the original timeline. Number three, Stain's change. I don't think it's extremely unbelievable, but it's still hard to understand. And it is a what if, and I get to do whatever I want to in a what if, but I also want to make things as realistic as possible. I just think through all this, Stain's ideology would have changed with Deku's impact, and having All Might there to also kind of influence Stain will also help at the same time. And finally, the realization of Full Cowl before the sports festival. Now, here's the thing about this. I had this idea, and it just makes sense to me that the mystery of Full Cowl was very obvious, and I think that All Might knew about it, but just didn't tell Deku because he felt like Deku should be able to think for himself, which Stain might not be thinking, or he just might feel a need to point this out. So yeah, Deku's going to have Full Cowl going into the UA Sports Festival. Now, here's a question for you, and this shakes up a lot of things in the series going forward. That being said, I'll be leaving a poll up in the iCard, and maybe on Twitter. Do you think that Full Cowl makes a huge difference in the next arc, It's all up to you. And remember, always go beyond plus ultra. We'll see you guys next time. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And thanks for watching.